Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. Joining me, Rob Harris, as ever, Martyn Ziegler from The Times and Tariq Panja from The New York Times. Straight back from Bangkok and into surprise news in the UK with an election called. First time there'll be a general election during a major football tournament since the 1970 World Cup.
Not the first time there's been a massive political vote in the UK during a major tournament, though, I think. Is that right? Wasn't it the
2016, anyone?
Brexit?
It happened just before England's defeat to Iceland. And actually on the day of that game in Nice, you had England fans chanting, "We're not in Europe anymore." And it came to reality far sooner on the pitch, of course, a few hours later against Iceland than it actually took to leave the EU.
Guys, this is a leader that didn't want to extend his term limit through other means, going to the polls, guys.
As we talk about so often in FIFA. So that 1970 World Cup, they actually did talk about the impact of the tournament in Mexico on the England team. It was called during the election, and according to various memoirs, the Labour Party did partly blame losing after having a poll lead on England being beaten by West Germany a few days later and having to hand over the World Cup they'd won in '66.
There's a sort of apocryphal story that the 1966 triumph helped Labour to power, but actually that wasn't true because the election was held several months beforehand. So it'd be interesting. I don't know. Do you actually think there's much of a bounce around how England are performing in a football tournament? I mean, we should also point out that there are other parts of Great Britain that vote in general elections apart from England.
Scotland, of course, are there, but not Wales.
No, and Rishi Sunak, who claims he's a sort of mad Southampton fan, sort of had a bit of a gaffe this week because he went to Wales and said to I think at an engineering company or something like that, he said, "So guys, are you all looking forward to the football at the Euros?" Not realising that Wales hadn't qualified, which not a great start.
I don't know if he said the Euros.
He said looking forward to the football.
No, not the clip I've heard. So if he'd been quicker to respond back, he could have referenced the Women's Euros qualifiers against Ukraine, a country he talks about a lot.
So what was the reaction, guys, from all those blokes at the engineering company that he was talking to?
Quite a bit of unease, and this was at day one of the campaign.
Well, things can only get better.
There is a big footballing impact of Rishi Sunak suddenly calling this election for July the 4th. It means Parliament is dissolved, so anything that was going through Parliament gets dropped unless it's quickly passed through something called the wash-up. One of the things we've talked about on the pod quite a bit over, well over a year, has been the introduction of a football regulator. Now, that requires a law to be passed. And this law now won't be passed. So it delays the regulator coming into action. And it's a big victory for the Premier League. They've succeeded in stalling it after helping to sort of weaken its powers as well.
So you're saying that he's called a general election under pressure from the Premier League's lobbying. That's led Britain to the polls. That is a lot of power the Premier League has there, Rob Harris.
Make it clear the two things aren't linked. It's merely that the football governance bill has just taken so long to go through, but it's one of the many acts that won't be coming into effect because the bills were still progressing through Parliament. But this was the regulator that was going to be assessing the finances of clubs, the ownership, protecting things like the badge and which competitions they can play. And it's been a signature plan of this government really since the Super League collapse of 2021. So, of course, there has been a change of prime ministers, but they've not managed to get it through.
I mean, I'm not sure this is Premier League filibustering, is it? I mean, this is just the government taking their time. I don't think the Premier League have been able to stall it. It's up to the government to bring these things in, and they have basically not allowed enough time. It hasn't even gone to the House of Lords, so there's no way it could be rushed through, really. I do think that there's now an opportunity. Labour have said that they're sort of quite keen on the regulator as well. And there are some sort of slightly concerning clauses, I think, in the football governance bill, which they should look at again, particularly around the fact that ownership decisions have to be, that the regulator will have to make those decisions taking into account the government's foreign and trade policy, which raises alarm bells to me about state-connected ownership.
And of course, it all started, the football regulator plan, under the premiership of Boris Johnson, who's probably gone quite quiet. But he was going to have a role at the Euros, incredibly.
It was quite a crazy story. He'd signed up with the betting company Paddy Power, known for kind of those extreme adverts, as one where a blind man is kicking a cat, etc., getting a lot of kind of viral play. And they thought, we'll get Boris Johnson involved. But it hasn't really gone to plan. There was an ad or a cameo from Johnson set for the Euros, in which he was going to be wearing an England shirt with a number 10, turning around and saying, I told you I'll get us back into Europe, a play on something we talked about a minute ago, Brexit. And it had been signed off by staff in Ireland, I understand, and then went to offices in London, and he's proven very divisive, a lot of anger there. So much anger that his role in the Euro 2024 ad campaign has been scrapped. So still a divisive figure.
Who's going to replace him?
Well, it's interesting. They've got a few people lined up for this ad campaign. And guys, Paddy Power adverts, they're known for like pushing the envelope a bit. It's amazing that this guy might be too toxic even for Paddy Power staff.
There is a limit at Paddy Power. This is a huge revelation.
Oh, incredible! I mean, wasn't it that company that Nicholas Bentler sort of pulled his trousers down to reveal his boxer shorts with their logo on, and ended up getting banned?
Yeah, in a more kind of serious, kind of political sense, that this is the former Prime Minister who, I think at the time, was having a row with the Football Association over signing up betting sponsors for the FA Cup. It's just interesting what people do when they're in office, and then once they leave, when there is an opportunity to potentially cash in, some of those views tend to soften.
And betting, never too far away from the headlines in football. Just look at those West Ham United shirts with Betway across them. Now one of those players wearing the shirt, Lucas Paqueta, charged in quite an incredible Football Association case, something that is really rare, actually, isn't it? It's a spot-fixing case. He's accused in 4 separate matches of intentionally getting himself booked for the purpose of multiple people, profiting from betting. We're used to cases of players themselves betting on outcomes of matches, even ones that they or their teams are involved in. But this is the accusation of directly manipulating part of a game, if not the final result.
Yeah, this is it's probably the most serious charge brought against a Premier League player since Bruce Grobbelaar was charged and then cleared of match fixing in 1994. I don't think there's a more serious one than this for a Premier League player. And we have seen a couple of years ago, the FA banned a player for getting deliberately booked in an FA Cup match, a lower league player, a non-league player, and banned him for 10 years just for that offence. So these are 4 accusations against Lucas Paqueta. And I mean, I'll speak about it a bit more, but it does seem a sort of, it's not just him involved.
No, it's in terms of the seriousness, Martyn. Yeah, you can't overstate that. It's huge, isn't it? And the tariff, looking at the FA's sanctioning list for this, it could be up to a lifetime ban, but several years potentially for Lucas Paqueta. And Martyn, you said you were going to come back to it. This involves friends and family, is it, on Paqueta Island, the island that's given him his nickname just outside of Rio. Can you give us some more details on what's actually happened?
Yes, you're right. It's sort of accounts linked to people close to him, not him himself. But it's not just him. There's also the Real Betis Brazilian Luis Enrique, who has been investigated for receiving a yellow card playing against Villarreal in La Liga. And according to Globo, this was like a sort of combined bet that they're getting paid out on both these things happening, and they both were booked. And I think when Javier Tebas talked about this in September, he said there might even be a sort of link with a tennis player somehow. So this is sort of really quite serious. It does seem it's not just a one-off, as 4 separate offences. And we have to say, he says he's going to defend himself to his dying breath, and that he has not done anything wrong, and he's shocked and surprised about this. But it does mean I suppose initially Manchester City, I'm sure, will not exercise the £85 million release clause in his contract to sign them now.
Yeah, Paqueta does deny wrongdoing. He says he has cooperated. There are 2 additional charges in the FA case relating to his cooperation. These things very often come to light because of suspicious betting patterns being flagged. So if there's suddenly a load of money put on a seemingly quite minor outcome or smaller moment in a game, that can flag in the algorithms of the betting companies, and then they follow the trail of these things. Because if we think about an entire game, just earning a booking in a particular moment is, not something maybe you'd bet on regularly. If you watch these instances, the allegations that are sent to these instances when he's said to have intentionally got books, they're not seemingly blatant.
No, and it's going to be hard to make the case. But you mentioned the betting companies, and what's really interesting here is that the alarm was actually raised by Betway, the company that is on West Ham's shirts, the shirt that Paqueta is wearing. That kind of talks to this other point about football's kind of surrounded by betting and betting companies. Meanwhile, we've got this issue with this player. It kind of brings all of that to light as well, doesn't it? The kind of football being draped in betting brands and ads, and it's a big part of the industry. And now we have this player, also this multi-millionaire player, obviously doesn't need the money. You wonder what pressures are on footballers as well from outside influences.
The other thing to point out about the seriousness of this is that although from speaking to people within the FA and West Ham United, there's no sort of indication that the police have been involved. But they have been around spot fixing cases in the recent past. I mean, 2011, 3 Pakistan cricketers, Salman Butt, Mohammed Amir and Mohammed Asif, were sent to prison for a conspiracy to deliberately bowl no balls in the 2010 test against England at Lord's. So, they received money in order to do so. There's no suggestion that Lucas Paqueta has received any money from this, but it is, that's how serious it can get.
Yeah, obviously a completely different case, but that cricket one, at the time, the judge said, whenever in the future there are surprising events or results, followers of the game will be left to wonder whether what they have been watching is a genuine contest between bat and ball.
And also the risk, I guess, with deliberately getting yellow cards is you actually have to do something that will get one. Now, imagine a player got injured as a result of someone trying to deliberately get... But I mean, it's just all awful, isn't it, if you start thinking about all the various elements of this?
Yeah, there's one previous case actually involving a Lincoln City player who received ultimately a 5-year ban for instances in 2 separate matches in the FA Cup of being deliberately booked. In one of the instances, when he conceded the free kick, the other team started to go on the attack, but then there was a counter-attack and his own team actually ended up scoring as a result from it. So actually, university managed to benefit his own team.
Mitigating circumstances, Rob.
Yeah. So he now has until the start of June, so just barely a week or so from recording, to respond to the charge. He's got the Copa America coming up from Brazil.
I don't think he will have the Copa America coming from Brazil. I find it very difficult now to think that Lucas Paqueta will be picked in the Brazil squad with this hanging over him. I mean, it'd be interesting to see. In the past, they have dropped players under these circumstances.
Yeah, they dropped him after the investigation was announced in August. Brazil didn't pick him for the matches in September, I think.
So that's one still to watch. In terms of course, English football, because we're talking about the end of the Premier League season, the huge success for Manchester City, 4 titles in a row. But what's been hanging over all of that success, Tariq?
Oh, well, where do you want me to start? It would take a long time to go through a list of 115 charges. I mean, that's what's hanging over them, guys, isn't it? It's still that case is unresolved. And Manchester City winning 4 Premier League titles is unprecedented, 4 in a row of any English title in previous to the Premier League. And it's such a great achievement. But, and again, people won't be surprised that I'm talking about it, given that, we do talk about it. It does cast a pall over the Premier League. I noticed, Martyn, Alison Britton, the Premier League chairperson, handed over the trophy. Not Richard Masters, the Premier League CEO. He wasn't there. He was at Arsenal instead. There was speculation that that's why Richard Masters wasn't going to be there. I don't think that's the case. But again, the fact people are saying that's why he wasn't there shows just, I guess, what a big deal this is.
Well, I mean, Arsenal did have a chance to win the title themselves, didn't they?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
they
exactly.
needed, one of them needed to be at Arsenal, one of them needed to be at Manchester City. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably. But did you notice this thing about the Manchester City social media account put this message out saying this means 4 with 4 trophy emojis, which is a sort of a dig at Liverpool because they've had this slogan since 2017 saying this means more. It's been their sort of brand slogan. So a bit of a dig, and then John W. Henry's wife responded by saying, "Thank you, thank you for thinking of us on your special day."
That was a great one from Linda Pizzuti. I mean, it's almost ultimately some of the harmless jibes between rival clubs there, and I thought it was quite entertaining from Manchester City doing that, and likewise in reverse from Liverpool. Of course, all about their Klopp farewell celebrations.
Yeah, huge weekend for the Premier League in a season, I guess, with a load of issues. The asterisk season, we had the Nottingham Forest points penalty, of course, the Everton points penalty, the pending City case, and just on that, the situation with Everton is still ongoing with regards. Is it going to be bought? Probably not. Clearly by 777, and the repercussions of these points.
Yeah, in a season that saw all 3 promoted clubs go straight back down immediately. So Luton, Sheffield United and Burnley. So that could actually make you think it's not a very competitive season, but so much went down to the final day that it seemed to be. So Burnley straight back down again. Now they're seeking some cash from Everton, aren't they?
They are. But before that, I would say, I think it was built as a season that would go and be a nail biter, but it really wasn't in the end, because the three relegation places were kind of fixed before the last weekend. Something miraculous like Manchester City losing a football match had to happen for Arsenal to win the league, and pretty much all the Champions League places had been sealed. But yeah, Burnley are seeking, I think, about £60 million from Everton because of the PSR penalty that was issued to Everton. Essentially, the Premier League saying Everton broke the rules. Burnley is saying as a result of that, they got relegated the season before last, and that's the cost. And this is going to rumble on. The 2 clubs in the Premier League are talking still, I understand, about trying to figure out a way out of this without it going to the courts.
Of course, Sheffield United did gain some compensation in 2007 after they were relegated at the expense of West Ham, when, of course, West Ham had the signings of Tevez and Mascherano, which were found to be problematic in terms of third-party ownership.
Well, massively in the end. It was a real headache because Carlos Tevez, who hadn't been playing particularly well for much of that season, ended up going on a 7-game goal-scoring spree, 7 games in a row, including a winner at Old Trafford that kept West Ham in the Premier League. I think at the time Sheffield United out. They went to the courts. I think it was about 25 million. But that the way that payment schedule was organised was that it wasn't a lump sum. It was paid over time. And from what I understand, I think Burnley aren't seeking to cause even more immediate chaos for Everton. If there is a settlement, it would be over a number of years. I think that's the plan at the moment.
I mean, interestingly, with Sheffield United, I think they initially were seeking 45 million compensation, and they settled for just under 20. in the end. Yeah.
Burnley also seeking quite a bit of cash from Bayern Munich.
Yeah, a defender of Manchester City and Belgian fame, Vincent Kompany, was very successful getting Burnley promoted. Now, Bayern Munich, despite the fact they've been relegated, they want him as their head coach, and Burnley obviously want a payout for that.
Credit for the guy. You wonder how many coaches would have the same sort of job offers when you're relegated in the Premier League, immediately getting one of the big jobs in European football, although in part that might be about Bayern Munich being turned down by so many as well.
Yeah. Oh, got a funny little anecdote on this, actually. Bumped into Alan Pace, the Burnley owner, at an event a couple of weeks ago, and this came up. And he was adamant that if Vincent Kompany signed up to a 5-year contract, said his relationship with Vinny is so good that there is no way he's going to leave and join another club. He's here for years. We're going to work together. And I remember saying to him, well, that'd be really, wow. It's quite amazing, because it will go against the trend of, everything in this industry where players and coaches, even executives, they're always trying to get another move or move up. And he said, no, not going to happen. So it's funny where we are now. If Bayern Munich do want Vincent Kompany, the chances are compensation being paid, Vincent Kompany will probably pick Bayern Munich over Burnley. Martyn?
It's a tough choice. It is a very tough choice. Champions League or Championship. Anyway, of course, I'm sure he'll go. Well, and I don't think most Burnley fans would begrudge him that either. Yeah, it's been an interesting week for football managers, with Mauricio Pochettino leaving Chelsea by mutual consent. But I think it was fairly clear that he had come to the end of his road, and they swiftly and efficiently worked to get him out the door.
How does this all look then? How does this all look for Todd Bowley and Clear Lake? They inherited Thomas Tuchel. He'd gone within weeks. Then they brought in Graham Potter. He didn't last the season. Frank Lampard brought in briefly. Pochettino was meant to be the person to mould this young squad. And in the end, although they actually performed slightly better than they were looking at one point by finishing sixth in the end, he's gone after a season too.
To be honest, it reflects awfully on them, and he leaves with his reputation intact, as you mentioned. If you look at the results, they won 5 games in a row towards the end of the season under him. The players seem to be playing for Pochettino. It's a really bizarre situation here again with Chelsea. $1 billion plus spent on the new recruits, 2 point whatever billion on buying the club. It's hard to know where it goes from here.
You wonder if they're looking to the long term, because in a year's time they should be heading to the United States to play this Club World Cup, and a potential good payday from FIFA. I wonder how much that's playing into their minds.
Probably not much. I don't think they need to sort their Premier League form out before you're thinking about Club World Cups. But Siegs, what do you make of all this?
Well, it may just be coincidence. Like a few hours beforehand, I had published my annual analysis of value for money at the club's performances in terms of pounds spent to points won, and Chelsea were bottom of the table. So maybe they looked at that, thought, well, if Martyn Ziegler is saying that, then that's good enough for us.
Well, to be fair,
you do the end of year review for all the managers.
Biggs, you think you could do a job there?
In which role?
I don't think I could do any job there, to be honest. No job there at all.
Not even comms?
Actually, I think I probably could cut the grass on the pitch and the training pitches, because I am quite good at that.
Well, we're pretty good about getting into the weeds of various stories.
Good one, Rob.
Speaking of getting into the weeds, Rob, there's a very interesting story a week or so ago, published by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in The Guardian, into the old ownership under Abramovich, wasn't there?
There was, from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, looking into Roman Abramovich and the funding of Vitesse Arnhem. Now, we've not been able to hear anything from Abramovich or from those connected to him, but this was Simon Locke, who's been speaking to us from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism about his reporting. Well, there's been quite a focus this season on Premier League's points deductions, but one that's far bigger has been in the Netherlands, where Vitesse Arnhem have been handed an 18-point deduction over licensing issues. They're under investigation over links to Roman Abramovich, of course sanctioned by the EU, and of course in the UK, the former Chelsea owner. And now we have some more of the details emerging just about Abramovich's links to Vitesse, uncovered by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and we are joined now by their reporter Simon Locks. Simon, welcome to Sport Unlocked.
Hello, glad to be here.
So why did you want to start looking into Roman Abramovich, and what have you uncovered new that you believe about Vitesse, a club with long-standing roots, founded in 1892?
So the Bureau of Investigative Journalism has been focused on Russian kleptocracy, particularly in light of the Ukrainian war. There's been a lot of, cyber warfare going on in the background. And as part of that, we've had a series of leaks relating to Russian oligarchs and their finances. And Abramovich was one of these people. And untangling the web of his sort of offshore structures has proved very revealing inside and outside of football. And this was one of the lines that we were looking at for some time. Obviously, it's kind of been an open secret how close the club has been with Chelsea over the years. I mean, I think it's 29 players have been loaned during the Chelsea, during Abramovich's ownership. They've been colloquially called Chelsea B, but the sort of formal ties between the two clubs have always been denied. And so when we were coming across networks of loans, various offshore jurisdictions that seem to have been set up to be, frankly, as opaque as possible, it really obviously piqued our interest. And the first story we did last year looked at how over 100 million euros had gone through this network of loans and had ended up on Vitesse's bank balance sheet. And really, our most recent story is kind of been looking at the more recent connections between them. They're currently still nominally owned by a Russian businessman called Valery Oy, and funded through one of his companies. And we've been looking at basically how that company obtained funds, and there is an overwhelming connection to Abramovich once again. And I think there's a broader backdrop that Vitesse has found itself in huge financial turmoil, and as you say, is going to be relegated, might even go bankrupt. So it's a really tough time for the club.
What is Mr. Oif, the nominal owner of Vitesse, saying about all of this? Because you say he owns the team. You've said that the funding seems to have come from Roman Abramovich. What is this man saying? What is the future of his ownership of the club as well?
Oif has made clear since the war broke out in 2022 that he wants to sell the club. He wants to end ties with it. His position has always been that the money he used to fund Vitesse was his own, and that he has not had any influence from Abramovich. He didn't respond to our most recent request to comment. However, yeah, as I say, the sort of documents, there's a large amount of loan arrangements between the company and other huge network of sort of Abramovich-related entities that kind of call that into question.
I know the Premier Leagues are investigating Chelsea for sort of allegedly irregular payments made during Abramovich's time related to transfers. So, I mean, when you sort of get these leaks on various things, I mean, how difficult is it to sort of work out what actually is happening, what it means, or is there quite a clear paper trail for these things, or does it very, very hard work?
I imagine it's one of those ones where it's very easy when you're internally and you know what you're looking at, and then from someone coming in and you're looking at unstructured data. I mean, I've been looking at Abramovich-related leaks for over a year now, and I've got my head around it a fair amount now, I'd say. But when you're faced with huge numbers of just generic shell company names, it's really hard to trace. And I think the other thing with these sort of football related payments is, okay, you can understand Abramovich's sort of structures, but then all it takes is for him to interact with a third party, generic business worldwide limited in Belize, and suddenly, okay, we have no idea who's behind that. And it's only really through a sort of patchwork of different leaks or public information, or just sort of even the tiniest nib of information, that you're able to piece a bit more of it together. I mean, that was one of the things we looked at previously in November with the Cyprus Confidential project, was Abramovich's offshore payments that were related to football, often for scouting, or payments to individuals that seemed to be aligned with when he was signing players and managers.
Yeah, Simon, the other question I have after all of this is a convoluted work, like you said, you've done a year. The idea that football regulators, be it the UEFA or the Premier League, will ever get their hands around any of this stuff seems mind-bogglingly difficult, or nigh on impossible, because you've only been able to do this thanks to leaks because of a war. So when the fans around Europe, etc., are thinking about financial fair play or regulation, they've got their hands tied, haven't they? These governing bodies, they haven't got subpoena powers unless someone leaks to them. They're not really going to get to the bottom of any of this, are they?
Yeah, they do. I do sympathise with the struggle they face, because, as you say, they can't force clubs to hand over this information. I think it will have to be a case of, you give us this information, or, there is some punishment or another. I think it also speaks very much to, the due diligence that clubs are putting into where their money's coming from. I mean, one of the things that really surprised me the most about having done this story, when we did the original one last year, as I say, we found over 100 million going through, appeared to be a network of companies that ended up in Paqueta. And Paqueta came back and said, yes, we got funds, over 100 million from this BVI company, Marindale Trading. We were never aware of where Marindale got its own money from. We were never party to that knowledge. And, this is the statement. You can go look at it on their website. This is what they put out the day after our piece. And all I can think of is, wow, like, you've got over 100 million coming into your company, and you have no idea where it's come from. Like, what assurances have you been given? And then what assurances have you given the regulator in turn? And I think it's going to have to be a case, as you say, you can't force them, but it is this sort of give or take, right?
A lot of people listening will be wondering, obviously, how this information is gained. You mentioned cyber earlier. You won't want to give too much away. Is it relying on whistleblowers and leaks, or other methods?
Look, it's always a difficult one with these sort of things. You have to weigh up the public interest and assess how you're going to use that information. But there is a mixture of what is essentially being third-party hacking campaigns that have been done by both Russia and Ukraine, and more broadly. And then also, there are whistleblowers who are providing information that have formed some of the, bedrock of the data sets we use, like Panama Papers and that sort of thing. So it is a mixture of that.
Obviously, we've seen information in sport from fancy bears with hacking become part of a public conversation about what substances athletes might be taking. Is there any uneasy? It's quite a difficult thing to weigh up in terms of using information that might be from a hack of some sort.
Yeah, and we have stringent sort of public interest tests that we do internally, as I'm sure all the big media publications do. Obviously, we view the public interest on how some of the most prized cultural assets in Europe are being managed, and the integrity of the sport as a whole outweighs the sort of other aspects of it. I guess there's more broadly about information in there that will never see the light of day, and there's good reason for that.
How have you sensed Abramovich is viewed? We're now sort of over 2 years into this war, 2 years since his sort of downfall from Chelsea and being forced to sell.
I think it's a real watershed moment. Hopefully, certainly in Dutch football, it seems maybe that spreads further of the source of funds and the accountability of owners and where they've got their money from and how they are using it. I think we can't simply have a carte blanche, like there are rules on the pitch, we have referees, etc., that come off the field and it's a wild west. I think Bethesda is a cautionary tale, really, of offers that appear to be too good to be true. You had an ailing football club in 2010, mid-tier, had not had brilliant success. Suddenly, a man, Mayor of Jordania, comes in and says, I can take you to greatness. And now we fast forward through 3 owners, all of whom are close to Abramovich, and geopolitics has come to Arnhem. And now we have a club that's going to be relegated, may even lose a professional license, is facing bankruptcy. This is really a dangerous moment for the club. And I think it sends a message to which goes far beyond the Netherlands.
So great to hear them from Simon Lott from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. Again, we've not had any comment from the Abramovich side, but the far-reaching consequences of this war in Ukraine.
It's funny how fast the time has passed since the initial Russian invasion, but the impact on sport continues. We've got the Olympics and the Russian involvement. Rob, back to football finance, though. Big story in Italy this week. Martyn, Rob, Inter Milan, they won the league recently again.
But an enforced sale of the club, hasn't there been? Seized by Oaktree, an investment fund.
So this Oaktree had loaned them a lot of money, and basically they weren't repaid, so they've taken control of the club. This is like Inter Milan, Tariq, owned by Suning, the huge Chinese conglomerate. I mean, how have they got into this position?
Well, this is more to do with their situation in China. Their business is under huge pressure over in China. Like a lot of those football investors from not so long ago, China's biggest real estate investors got into football. A lot of them have sunk Chinese football on the floor over there because those billionaires essentially are no longer billionaires. Oaktree had lent Inter's owners, Suning, to about $275 million at a very high interest rate. That ramped up to $400 million. And with this deadline looming, this fund, one of these kind of vulture capitalist funds that looks for distressed debt, found it, and it's now found itself owning a Serie A club. And it's very similar to what happened to AC Milan, the other Milan club, another giant of European football. It was owned by a Chinese investor. At that time, not as well known and as well capitalized as these guys were. And Elliott, the fund, ended up seizing AC Milan not so long ago. I'm not sure what the lessons are here. Is it do your due diligence? Is there something for the authorities in Italy to check before these deals get the sign-off?
And American investment funds perhaps spotting an opportunity then to gain a Serie A club, because we've now got 7 of the Serie A clubs under American ownership. Yeah,
but there is, and it's like there's, 13, 14 of Premier League as well, so there is that pattern. But Oaktree isn't a company that wants to own football clubs. It's a distressed debt company. It just wants to make a shed load of money at eye-watering interest rates. It's kind of now got this club, I guess, at a very deep discount, I suppose. I wouldn't be surprised to see it offloaded. And guys, someone interesting has popped up. I don't want to call him a comedian because I'm not sure he is.
Certainly don't want to call him a billionaire.
Certainly don't call him a billionaire. But Martyn, does the name Thomas Zilakis mean anything to you?
Our Finnish friend who claimed he wanted to take over Manchester United. I think he was. I think we've mentioned him before because on the statement that was issued about he put his mobile phone number on. Anyone want to get in touch? Yeah, call me.
Transparency. Thank you, Martyn. The last time we mentioned him, wasn't there a Singapore arrest warrant out for him?
Yes, that's right. But to go back to Milan, with all these financial issues around, I mean, they're meant to. They've been sort of penciled in to host the San Siro, to host the 2027 Champions League final. UEFA refused to confirm it because they're waiting to hear the sort of detailed plans for renovations. So there's a lot on their plate.
And talk about the success this week for an Italian club, Atalanta, which is of course co-owned by one of the Boston Celtics investors, Stephen Pagliuca. Won their first trophy in, is it 6-7 decades of ending Bayer Leverkusen's unbeaten season by winning that Europa League in Dublin.
Yeah, played the role of party poopers to Leverkusen's unbeaten season, but quite an incredible story for them. You mentioned how many decades they had gone without winning anything. And then there's a fantastic story of the London-born winger, Ademola Lookman, who essentially had to leave England after trying and I guess failing to establish himself at a number of Premier League clubs. And he has found himself at Atalanta at 26. And he scored a hat-trick, first time, and a great hat-trick as well, if you saw the goals. First time since the 70s anyone's done that. And that's great credit to also another good story, the coach Gasparini there at Atalanta. I mean, the type of football they play is really exciting to watch as well. And it's great to have new winners. It doesn't have to be billionaire-owned clubs. Although, Rob, you mentioned this guy Pagliuca. I'm sure he's not short of a few bob, but they haven't done it, by spending loads of money.
No, and this victory coming a few hours after the UEFA Executive Committee meeting in Dublin, which made various decisions on those Champions League final hosts and delaying a decision on Milan. That was the main stuff that we got out of the Exco. We didn't hear anything afterwards, did we, from them?
Do we ever hear anything from them? I mean, we won't go into this won't be the press conference podcast again after last week, but there isn't. We don't really hear from them. What was the news from there? What else came out of that Exco, guys?
Well, was a lot of conversation around this leaked recording that came out, not from that meeting, but relating to UEFA.
Yeah. So this is interesting because it involves Luis Rubiales, the former Spanish FA president. Of course, most listeners would know him for that kiss, forced kiss on Hermosa, the Spanish World Cup winning player after the final. But before that, there was a big scandal involving him with these leaked tapes, with Gerard Piqué involved, even the Spanish Prime Minister at the time. But a new one has surfaced in which he's talking to Gerard Piqué, in which he's telling him that he should send signed shirts from himself and Lionel Messi to Alexander Schäfer, the UEFA president. Again, this I'm not sure what the suggestion is here, but again, this kind of way football works. The thing with these leaks, like football leaks, it takes them to tell us kind of what happens behind the scene, how relationships work, guys.
Always raising the question whether such things were gained properly, whether there is a public interest in us hearing it and how it was gained too, as we were discussing with our earlier guest.
Yeah, good point, Rob. Just to UEFA, Atalanta, strange thing is that it could mean the 6 Serie A clubs in the Champions League next season. Atalanta getting there from the Europa League, so Roma could go through as well.
All things looking good, maybe building up to Euro 2032, if Italy can build on this sort of platform.
Yeah, just a reminder, by the way, that the 6 clubs will be in this new competition, right? This expanded Champions League. How many teams will be playing in this new format, guys?
36, with 8 games per team in the new group phase.
Yeah, they don't just need to build on this platform, though, Italy. They need to build, full stop. I think that is the big challenge for 2032, whether they can actually find the resources and the time to update their stadiums.
Now, last week, we did spend quite a lot of time focusing on the FIFA Congress, and one of the flagship announcements from Gianni Infantino was the new strategy to combat racism around the world. A lot of it was about this new symbol that you show a referee to get a match stopped if you've been racially abused. But what happens if it's the referee who's faced the racist abuse? Well, within days of the FIFA Congress in Bangkok, this happened in Uruguay, and it was a coach of the top flight team, Miramar Misiones, and the coach Ricardo Caruso Lombardi. And he racially abused the referee, Javier Ferrez, after he was sent off. He lost his temper after a player had been dismissed. The manager did say he was embarrassed, but it did lead to him losing his job. He quit.
Yeah, he did. I mean, look, I've seen the video there. Someone, unluckily for this chap, maybe was just filming on a phone just behind him as all of this was taking place. And it doesn't leave any doubt as to what he was saying and what he was calling the referee.
I mean, at a moment that you thought, we might hear from FIFA. This is where it's interesting how certain incidents do get more attention than others. And I only spotted this on one website, and the main English language version was from the AFP news agency, and not many other places at all. Obviously, it happened in Europe. It would be huge. We'd probably be hearing from FIFA on it.
Yeah, I think that's often how the sort of news agenda works. Things happen in places other than Europe, and it sort of goes under the radar. It shouldn't do, but it happens. I mean, it did sound particularly horrible, this racist abuse. And the Lombardi, I think, his explanation was, he said, "Oh, the only thing that bothers me is that they bring racism into the mix, because I lived with several guys who are dark-skinned, and we are always joking around and hugging."
Now, UEFA does have a minimum 5-game ban, doesn't it, for racism? But what happens if it's a coach who's then quit his role? What sort of ban do you impose? It would apply at the start of their next job? Does he just take a job potentially for 5 matches to serve out a ban in some level of football and then resumes elsewhere? This is where there's all sorts of issues with the guidelines and the punishments that are in place. I don't know what the Uruguayan punishments are, but also why we still have so many questions about the anti-racism plan.
Well, I think that's what FIFA need to get across, and that's perhaps what they were trying to say afterwards. They want this uniform anti-racism, as you said, plan, that if this happens, this mechanism kicks in no matter where in the world it happens. And one of the other things this guy Lombardi said, he said, look, his comments were made in anger because it's his way of speaking when he gets angry, as if it's okay. So, then you've got this kind of weird cultural issue, is that he's now saying, I guess, where he is from, that is normal and natural, where it shouldn't be. And that's part of, maybe some of this will educate wider society through football, given the impact of football. It's so popular. Maybe it can have that impact outside of the game. Maybe don't say that when you're angry.
Right, yeah. The 62-year-old Argentine coach here using the language that we've heard blamed away before by Luis Suarez, Uruguayan player, when Liverpool, saying that's just sort of words that are used, and they have different meanings.
Yeah, good point, Rob. The other thing is, yes, different governing bodies, different competitions have different sanctions and sanctioning. I mean, I think UEFA's is 10 matches, and I think English football's is 5. So there's a sort of discrepancy there. And I think FIFA are setting up this new anti-racism, anti-discrimination committee, and this is something they should surely look at.
Is it right that committee was talking about bringing in the voices of players?
Yeah.
And this is exactly showing how it's not just players who can be racially abused in a football setting. Here's a referee. Could be a coach in a different situation. Could be a team doctor. Yeah,
exactly. And they probably have, to be honest, because we could ask the team doctor. I'm pretty sure, as you said, team doctors have, because they're kind of running on the field when players think, when fans think the other player on the other team is feigning injury, for example. But you're right. I just think we need some details on these things, don't we, guys? It's always like this big announcement, and then we move on to something else. We haven't had a chance to get much kind
It
of
just
flesh on the bones.
it appears that they've not thought beyond sort of the headline grabbing plan around players, not thought about the depth of the racism problem, as this incident has immediately shown this week.
Yeah, there was a case in Brazil, actually. I remember, I think it was around 2015, where, and it became a big kind of story in Brazil, and racism stories at the time weren't picked up in Brazil as much as they should be, because it was commonplace for players to get racist abuse, and even referees. But what happened in this instance, the referee's car was daubed with slogans, and the bananas were placed on his windscreen and exhaust pipe and things like that, and it became a big story. But then they go up and they come down. They go up and come down. The Brazilian CBF actually has been quite strong on racism under current president, because I guess a player abuse because of Vinicius Junior in Spain, and they've been trying to ask for points penalties. And we've talked about this before. We don't need to labour it, but why that might be a deterrent inside football stadiums.
One more wait to hear more from FIFA on. I feel we've not mentioned Saudi Arabia a lot in recent weeks in the pod. There are times when their investments do pique our attention. And another one this week, an announcement from tennis, the women's tour. The WTA has now signed a deal with the Public Investment Fund. They're going to become the title sponsor of the rankings. It follows a similar deal with the men's tour as well, the ATP. A completely different strategy to golf adopted in tennis, which is buying their way in through the established series.
Yeah, and not without a major fallout here. If we look back and see, whose shoulders women's tennis has been built on, one of the people we will undoubtedly mention would be Martina Navratilova, one of the best female tennis players of all time. Now, she had spoken out in January when this was first mooted. They wrote an op-ed with Chris Evert. She wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post. And now the deal has been signed. She said she will not attend the WTA finals as a pundit following the decision to take it to Saudi Arabia. Now, it's weird, isn't it? This quest for money and growth at what expense? Because the idea that Martina Navratilova does not feel comfortable at a WTA event or the main finals, it just feels more than a big problem. It's a major issue here, isn't it, for tennis? What does it say?
Yeah, it's a massive issue, and well done for Martina Navratilova having the sort of strength of personality to take that position. What does the Saudi PIF benefit from sponsoring? I mean, they're not trying to sell anything, are they?
It's a really good point. I was thinking that. It reminds me, do you remember when, just going back to Everton, when Alisher Usmanov was the sponsor, the Russian oligarch? He obviously was a friend and a business partner of Fahad Moshiri, the current owner. Suddenly, this slew of sponsorships, including a training ground sponsorship of USM Holdings, his holding company, like plastered all around it. As you said, these aren't public-facing companies, not selling anything. The PIF is the sovereign investment fund of Saudi Arabia. It's weird it would be the PIF being the title sponsor. Why not one of its brands?
Yeah, they talk about trying to increase participation, inspiring the next generation of talents, and being a catalyst for the growth of women's sports. That's putting money in without necessarily any sign of what they generate back in return. Many sponsors around the world, if they're going to invest in sport, to sort of show to their shareholders, well, what are we going to gain out of this? How are we going to grow the business?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can ask a few companies in the UAE over the last 10 years what the benefit of that association with Man City is. Maybe there's an answer. But back to Saudi, I noticed big, in fact, a fantastic heavyweight boxing fight in Riyadh between Tyson Fury and Usyk for the world heavyweight title, undisputed, first time in 2-3 decades. But the thing I noticed was everyone kept thanking, including the broadcasters, whether it was DAZN or others, the participants, they just kept saying on social media and elsewhere, a name check for this guy, His Excellency Turki al-Sheikh, the governor of Saudi Arabia's kind of entertainment scene. It just felt a bit weird. Like almost every single mention of this fight, I kept seeing him and his name reference in a way. I've not seen that before. Guys, can you recall a time where I don't know, where someone had mentioned that often, who I guess is the businessman or a minister? I don't know.
I mean, you do get promoters talked about a lot of all things in boxing, whether it's the Hearns, Frank Warren. So it's not unusual for people who aren't the fighters to be sort of front and centre.
I've not seen, say, a Sky or a DAZN, really genuflecting towards Eddie Hearn or Bob Arum or anything like that. It just felt in almost every social media post. Contractual.
Yeah, no, I saw you point that out, Tariq. He has got like millions and millions of Twitter followers. I wasn't sure if this was a sort of a genuflection or if this was trying to get him, tagging him and say that he would retweet or whatever. I wasn't quite sure what was just the
He's very
background.
visible. He was sat in the front row, Martyn, next to again. I think he sits in the front row again. This might be contractually stipulated, I don't know, or they might be just very good friends. Cristiano Ronaldo Cristiano Ronaldo always sits next to him, and this time they had Anthony Joshua alongside them.
Maybe Turkey Al Sheikh invited you, but he forgot that he blocked you on social media.
It's true. So, are you saying I should launch a "Come and Get Me" plea?
Yeah, maybe you'll be sitting next to them at the next big fight too. Or Turkey Al Sheikh can just message us at Sport Unlocked on X, Facebook and Instagram. Send the invite there. Well, I'm sure he's already listening and subscribing to us like everyone else should be. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.